Bob Elias, and as chairman of the Associated Student Speakers Program, I'd like to welcome you to our first program of the spring quarter. I would especially like to welcome all of the elementary and junior high school students who are here as guests of UCLA. We are very happy that the Chancellor allowed us to open our doors for the first time and invite people from the outside community to this very interesting and very important program. I hope you'll enjoy your visit to UCLA, because in a few years you'll be coming here. We are very honored to have with us today the Apollo 14 astronauts: Alan Shepard, the Prime Crew Commander; Stuart Roosa, the Command Module Pilot; and Edgar Mitchell, the Lunar Module Pilot. Astronaut Mitchell was born in Texas in 1930 and received his Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial Management from the Carnegie Institute of Technology. And in 1964, he received a Doctor of Science degree in Aeronautics from MIT. Apollo 14 was his first flight in space. Astronaut Roosa was born in Colorado in 1933 and graduated with honors and a Bachelor's of Science degree in Aeronautical Engineering from the University of Colorado. Apollo 14 was also his first flight into space. Astronaut Shepard was born in New Hampshire in 1923 and received a Bachelor of Science degree from the United States Naval Academy in 1944 and an honorary Master of Arts degree from Dartmouth College in 1962. Captain Shepard holds the distinction of being the first American to journey into space. The Apollo 14 mission lasted 9 days, and astronauts Shepard and Mitchell were on the surface of the moon for 33.5 hours. The Apollo 14 astronauts traveled a total distance of about 1 million miles and successfully completed all of their mission objectives. The astronauts brought back 96 pounds of lunar surface materials, and the cost of their mission was $400 million. We will be showing a film of their Apollo 14 flight, and it will be narrated by the astronauts. And afterwards, we will have a few slides of the moon. And right now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the captain of the crew, Alan Shepard.
Thank you. Thank you. We'd like to take the time today to tell you a little bit about Apollo 14 and what it means to us. We have a movie to show you, which we will narrate since it has no sound on the film. We have a few slides that we've selected to show you, and we'll try to save some time at the end of the program to answer a few questions which you might have. Let me just say, before we start the film, that throughout the total space program, even starting with Project Mercury on through the last flight of Apollo, we have tried to make each step successively more difficult, successively more venturesome, successively more mature. I think if you will try to keep in mind what we feel one of the most important things of Apollo 14, which is perhaps insidious, is the fact that it is mature in its contribution to science, technology, and research. If you try to keep that in mind as we go through, I think that's the one point that we'd like to leave with you, is that this flight, and properly so, more than any others, has contributed a great deal to science. So with those simple opening remarks, I would like to ask, you're first, I think, Stu, to come up here. Roll the film, if you would, please, and we'll, in succession, narrate to parts of it. First will be Stu.
How do we turn these lights off here?
That was very good timing. We start right off with the liftoff. As you can, this beauty at liftoff weighs 6.5 million pounds, generating 7.5 million pounds of thrust and burning propellants at the rate of 15 tons a second. And after we went through the clouds, we did have an overcast that day. We were picked up by a tracking camera located down the beach. This is showing the entire stage, all 365 feet of the Saturn V. About, at this point, 35 miles high. We're going to have staging, or the first large stage will drop away here very shortly. There will be a flash as retro motors fire on that stage to drag it away from the rest of the vehicle. You will not see the plume, exhaust plume on the second stage. It's burning a different fuel. We're out of the atmosphere, and there go the retro rockets, and if you'll watch off to your left, you will see the large first stage dropping back. As I say, at this point, you've burned up about 4.5 million pounds of fuel at this, and we're into the mission about 2 minutes and 45 seconds or something like that, very close to that. This is a shot after we get on our way to the moon, in which we separate in the command ship. We have to turn around and pick up the lunar module. I'm driving it and aligning myself with this T that you see in the left of your screen, left center, and a sight in my window. I'm closing on the two vehicles. We have a mechanical probe at the very apex of our command ship, which will supposed to come in, some latches catch, and hold the two vehicles together. Don't know how close you followed the flight, but we did have some problems here with the probe. Very soon we'll have contact here. You'll see the limb move slightly. That's contact, and at that point we should have been the two vehicles docked. You'll now see sliding back. The film is still running, and you'll see the T come back into view as I back out. I hit the throttle, push it back in. We again do not get contact. This happened over a period of approximately 2 hours, and we did not have any film left when we made this successful docking using some procedures that was voiced up by Houston. This, once we got the two vehicles together, we knew we were on our way to at least the start of our lunar mission. Of course, without getting the two vehicles, we would not have a lunar landing. These are some shots taken inside the command module. The first one showing Al reading a checklist. I believe the next shot is myself down in the LEB. I have a patch over my eye because I've been using the optics. I want to keep the light out of one of my eyes. And of course we're in the weightless condition, or 0G at this point. This is showing Al Shepard using the onboard exerciser, which we used in 0G to stimulate our bodies, get your heart to pumping a little bit. Your heart has a tendency to become lazy in 0G. It doesn't have to work against gravity, and your pulse rate slows down and the heart gets a little lazy. Here's a little onboard tape recorder which we used both for pleasure and for business. Ed is about to drink some cocoa here, or hot chocolate, and listen to some music with this onboard tape recorder. This is a shot showing the lunar module Antares backing away from the command module. At this point, we're in lunar orbit. It's the day of the lunar landing. A few hours after this shot was taken, Al and Ed successfully landed in the Fraumar area of the moon. The large gold pads that you see are the landing gear of the lunar module, and this supports the limb or the lunar module on the surface. I'm taking the pictures pointing almost straight away from the moon up against the blackness of the space, which is just as black as you see it on that film if you're not looking at the sun or at the earth. Now shortly, in just a minute, the next sequence will be a shot of me in the Command Service Module Kitty Hawk. They're looking, of course, straight down at the moon. You'll see the command module going across the lunar surface. The lunar surface is cratered everywhere you want to look. Just the closer you look, the smaller the craters become. But there are craters essentially everywhere. This is a shot taken from about 8 miles high. We're now approaching the lunar sunset, or we refer to it as the terminator. If you'll note, the shadows on the ridges and the craters start to lengthen as we approach darkness. Very soon we'll see darkness coming in to the top of the film, and you'll see a formation, or it looks like a small mountain range, which is the Frau Morrow area in which Apollo 14 landed. You can see this start to come in now at the top of your screen. The green is unnatural. The lunar surface is not green. That's in the film. But here we are going into the sunset. I believe, Ed, you take it here.
All right, and this particular film is taken from the lunar module. If you'll tilt your heads to the right, you can see better. That would be the picture that we saw looking out the window. The crater right in the middle of the picture is Cone Crater, and it is the crater that we scaled the following day and got right to the rim, although we didn't know it at the time. As Stu pointed out, the green is an unnatural color due to the shadowing and the particular film that we're using. We were on automatic flight at this point, and our computer would have landed us just short of those 2 craters you see at the upper left of the screen that are getting quite large there now. Just about this point, Alan took over the manual control of the vehicle, and let's see, we're about there now. There we go. We took over manual control because we were a little bit to the south and, as I said, short of where we wanted to land the spacecraft. We started coming back to the right and moving up over these craters. These 2 craters we're approaching are the 2 north craters of the triplet chain, which you may have heard us refer to. You can see the boulders on the surface. We're about 150 feet in the air at this point, or above the surface at this point. And as we cross over, you see a little bit of dust being kicked up on the east rim of North Triplet. Now we're coming to a hover, slowing down our forward velocity, starting down at about 80 feet here. Our foot pad will end up just beside the second crater on the left side, the one that's now approaching the bottom. We're about 10 feet and about 5 feet. And there is touchdown. At that point, engine is off. The engine tails off and quits putting out exhaust, and we're on the surface. The feeling of relief at that point to know we were safely down on target was a very nice one indeed. Here is a picture of Mission Control where they have us plotted on the surface. Again, we have Mission Control, and up on the huge television screen you can see Alan as he comes down the ladder. The television camera is still mounted on the spacecraft. Shortly after this, he picks the camera up, moves it out to a more advantageous location, which it's in right now, aims it back at the spacecraft, and I come bouncing down the ladder. There was the bottom one. Somebody said, "Whoa, you're about to take the last step." And you jump down, and it's a very nice feeling to be on the surface. Here is our flag scene in which we erect the American flag. And Alan is holding the flag and getting ready to set it into the mast that I am hammering into the surface. The lunar lope, or bunny hop, that we use is a very easy gait to maintain, and it is, in my opinion, the easiest way to get around on the surface. I am reaching for a camera here to record Alan for posterity with the flag. I would like to point out to you, you can notice the long shadows The lunar module shadow is to the left. You can see my shadow as I get ready to take this picture. And to the right of the flag is the S-band antenna pattern shadow that sends the television back to Mother Earth. The colors in the photo are very realistic beyond Alan. Out to the left, the browns, light browns, dark browns, and grays are a very high fidelity representation of the lunar surface coloring. And the sky is totally black, as you see it there. There are no blues, of course, because no atmosphere. And in this scene, Alan says, get a little closer to the flag, as photographers always say, you know, move in a little bit, get a little tighter. Well, he had me move in closer to the flag. We got that picture. And I now turn the flag back around so that you can see it on your television screens, the television camera being out to the right. And we get ready to press on with our work of setting up the lunar experiments package. First of all, I have to come back and we together load our Met and pick up the packages and head out about 400 yards directly in front of the LEM, where we are now at this point setting up the ALSEP package. The dark package to the right, between the two of us, is the nuclear power station, and the one that I'm approaching there with the white and orange on it is a telemetry station that is powered by the nuclear station. To that telemetry station, we eventually set up 6 experiments which are monitored here on Earth and measure many different types of particles, seismic events, and other scientific data, and send it back from the lunar surface. Observe, we're having a little bit of trouble there. I have to drop down on one knee to reach some of the connections, while Alan is removing one of the experiment subpalettes in the background. Our next scene I want to prepare you for just a little bit. Again, tilt your head. This is the flag, and watch the separation as we lift off, and watch the flag blow. It does not blow over, by the way. It just flaps in the breeze. And that's the only breeze it had while it was on the lunar surface. We are now accelerating to return to orbit and to rendezvous with Stewart in the command module. He has just passed overhead at the instant of liftoff and is moving at 5,000 feet per second approximately, and we are now racing to catch up with him. When we insert into orbit about 5 minutes after liftoff, we will be about 140 miles behind him. The motion that you see here is really the motion that the spacecraft is executing. It is rolling and pitching because of its very light weight. You can observe that the moon takes on the characteristic of a plaster cast or a plaster mold as you get high above it. It looks like it's just a plaster of Paris mold dusted with brown and gray and a little bit of white powder. This area that you're looking at is the Fra Mauro area that Stewart talked about, which was our landing site. And in just a minute, there it comes. That dividing line, I believe, is the dividing line between the Fra Mauro and the Mare area that covers most of the lunar surface. And Alan will pick up here on the rendezvous.
We rendezvoused with Kitty Hawk on the first orbit faster than it had been done before, using a direct approach rendezvous we had practiced in the Gemini program. This is a view of the top part now of the lunar module Antares as seen from Kitty Hawk during the final few feet of the approach of the rendezvous. The two vehicles are now, although they're racing over the lunar surface, are essentially motionless with respect to each other. At this point, Stu and Kitty Hawk did a pitching maneuver. That is, he went head over heels completely around while we photographed to get an idea of the general condition of Kitty Hawk. You can see the engine nozzle looking directly at you now. That's that big bell-shaped thing. You'll see it a little bit better here in a minute. There it is on the bottom of the picture now. That thing on the left is the antenna which tracks automatically and maintains communications with the Earth. You see the docking probe ready for the docking at the very top now, and there's the command module, the cone-shaped on the top, and the windows you can see now on the bottom of the picture. At this point, we then closed to a lesser distance, and there, see the antenna flop up on the top there? That was just changing around, reorienting so we could maintain communications with the Earth. Stu flew on, and if you look right in the center there, those reflections are right in the area of the docking probe. We're looking directly at it now from our windows, but in a few minutes we'll pitch 90 degrees. You see, those are windows you see right there. Looking into the windows, the two dark spots just above the green areas. Now right now we'll pitch around. We've already pitched around here, so you're looking in the upper right-hand corner is the place where the docking probe goes. It's a drogue funnel-shaped device. And again, this picture is being taken from the command module and shows Stu lining up on the cross. We had some problems with the docking probe earlier, but this time it worked fine. The two vehicles are hooked together, and now they're brought together so that the latches are actually made. We had a little wind-up razor, which we took along with us this time to try out for the first time. It was a spring wound device. And you see me using it there. Now Stu is looking at a book, which he'll let go in a few minutes, and notice the pages separate, and they just floats around. It's really a great feeling up there. Here's a little orange drink for Stu. It's Florida orange juice. There you are. You know, for sleeping, we had little zip-up cocoon-type sleeping bags that we hooked on both ends, and we'd crawl on those at night and just relax and float around inside the bag, and therefore not float around the cabin. Let's see, yeah. Now we had some different types of food. Some of the earlier foods were were only dehydrated foods, and they were kind of bland when they were remixed with water. This particular package we have here is called a wet package. It's for hot dogs, and all I do is cut the top off and pull one of the hot dogs out. And whoops, there goes a piece. There you are. So these wet packs are much more tasty than some of the earlier foods. This is the ionization of the atmosphere. The spacecraft rushes into the atmosphere during re-entry. You can see the light color here on the left-hand side of the screen. What you're seeing on the right-hand side is the horizon of the Earth as the spacecraft is rolled so that the camera looks at it 90 degrees from the way you're seeing it. The rolling of the spacecraft actually controls the trajectory so that the spacecraft either comes in more steeply or skips out more, depending upon how it's rolled around. This is a view of the parachutes taken from the recovery ship. We were only 6/10 of a mile off of our target in the recovery, the closest yet. And the Pacific Ocean that day was beautifully quiet, clear, just a very few white caps. And believe me, those parachutes are a welcome sight. You'll see the Kitty Hawk hit the water here pretty soon. The splash looks like it might be kind of bad, but actually, as far as we were concerned inside, it was not uncomfortable at all. We weren't bounced around at all to speak of. These are the sailors on the deck of the ship, the rescue helicopter, the frogmen going in the water. And perhaps some of you saw this view on television. We did not use the uprighting bags as had been done in the past. The spacecraft stayed upright as it was, and we just floated there and and went through the procedure to turn off all the switches and get ready for the frogmen. Now we've put our masks on, and the spacecraft has been sprayed to prevent any possible bug contamination from lunar germs. I think that Apollo 14 has now proven that this will be no longer necessary, and that probably our flight will be the last during which we will have a quarantine after the flight. The little basket there, of course, being hoisted up. This is back in Houston in the control center, showing the same thing happening on their television. And here are some of the astronauts lined up there, watching the procedures in the control center. The New Orleans hangar deck is this scene, and we're just about to step out with our masks on. Wave to the people. And then we go into our little trailer, which is our home for the next couple days before we're transferred back to Houston. It's kind of small, and we were glad to get out of that into larger quarters. Okay. Okay, now we have some slides, but as the slides are being made ready, let me mention one thing. We had not planned to talk specifically to the economics of the space program today, but since it's been pointed out that the flight cost $400 million, let me also point out that the welfare programs at the same time cost $96 billion. Now let me put it to you another way. Let me put it to you specifically that the 1972 federal budget for health, education, welfare, insurance, Social Security, and VA benefits amounts to about 42%, 42 cents on the dollar, whereas the total space program amounts to only 1.4 cents. Now, we think it's a pretty inexpensive program. And I would also like to say, I would also like to make it clear that we don't think the two programs are in competition. I think that this country has a viable enough economy so that research can continue at the same time that the domestic problems are being solved. If we might have the first slide, I think we'll go through these very quickly so we can have some questions and answers. The first slide, please. This is a slide of Antares, a lunar module on the surface. We landed on a slight tilt. You can see about 7 degrees to the right, to our right, your left. The flag and the antenna, which Ed spoke of. Two things to notice in this picture. One is, you know, that you look at the sun here and it seems to be so diffused because it comes through the atmosphere and the light is so scattered. Looking at it here, you realize that the only diffusion you see is just that of the lens of the camera. You just get a few degrees off and it's completely black again. Also, notice the texture of this general terrain. We landed in an area which was supposed to be deposited material thrown out from a crater 1,100 miles away. It's rolling terrain, it's hilly, and if you look back in the background to the left, you see that the flank of Cone Crater starting to appear. We went on up that slope and on up in the distance, the other off the left of the screen. But you can see, as Ed said, it's all craters. It's just a question of this function of size. As a matter of fact, we probably landed in a crater ourselves, but one that's very shallow and had virtually no slope to the sides. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the things we did during the first period on the lunar surface was to set up a scientific experiment station. You can see it here in the center with its antenna pointed toward the Earth. It's powered by a nuclear power supply and will last 2 or 3 years. It sends back basically seismic signals so that when all of the lunar flights are completed, the geologists will be able to study the movements in the lunar crust, earthquakes, any kind of vibrations from these stations. Also, there are several devices that are used to measure the flow of particles, ions, which the station will send these signals back as the moon moves around the Earth so that we can get an idea of what happens to electrical energies that approach the Earth outside the Van Allen belts where we can't measure them here on the Earth. In the foreground is a little rubber-tired cart, an oversized golf cart or a rickshaw, or whatever you want to call it, that we use for our tools, our cameras, our equipment, and so on. And it worked extremely well. Now, the next Apollo 15 flight will have a four-wheeled vehicle, and the 2 astronauts will actually ride on it. Next slide, please. Just one more quick shot. This is a laser reflector. What you see down there is a matrix rows of mirrors, and laser beams are focused on that from the Earth, bounced back, and recorded and measured here on the Earth. And basically what it does is to keep track of the moon's motions, libration motions, and to compare those with the projected motions of the total solar system. Next slide, please. Okay, Ed.
This is a traverse map showing where we plan to go and where we actually went. The black line is the planned traverse that we were going to make, that we thought we would make before we got there. The white one shows where we actually went. The point C prime to the very far to the right of the screen is the furthest point to the east that we approached. The point C1, I believe it's labeled, I can hardly see it from here. C1 is the point nearest to Cone Crater, and that point is about 50 to 75 feet away from Cone Crater. And we did not see that 1,000-foot crater, although we were sure it was right there somewhere. And in another slide or so here, I will point out to you why we didn't see it, because you won't see it either, and you'll see exactly what we were looking at. You can see to the left of the limb is about a quarter of the way in from the left side. You can see that we set our ALSET package out to the left of that, and that was our first EVA activity, and our march to Cone Crater was the second EVA activity. May I have the next slide, please? This is a picture of the famous white rock. You can see the white rock to the right, and you can see a combination of white and brown rock to the left, which is a rock that excited the scientists quite a bit because it seemed to be indicative of the type rock that they expected to see in the Framaro area, and indeed it is. The loaf-shaped boulders in the background are right on the edge of Cone Crater. They are about 60 feet away from where this photograph was taken, and they're exactly on the rim. And it is very difficult looking at that photograph to see where that 1,000-foot crater is. It simply does not have the classic rim construction that we expected to see. May I have the next slide, please? Again, this is taken from the point C prime that I pointed out, and it again looks toward Cone Crater. It is a boulder field right at the easternmost point of our traverse. You can see these boulders. The near ones are about 3 to 4 feet in diameter. Some of the larger ones in the background run 7, 8, or 9 feet in diameter. And you can see that the near horizon, where the boulder field seems to stop and you pick up distant hills, that in reality is the rim of Cone Crater. But we did not recognize it at that time. It, as you can see, is a very rubbly area, large boulders. That material, a gray lunar material, that's the fine material on the surface, is kind of soft and mushy, and it pushes down when you step on it, very much like flour or talcum powder would do. Stu?
Okay, if we'll have the next slide, just very briefly, I'll try to show you a few scenes of what the moon looks like from about 60 miles up. This one is taken near the terminator, or as I say again, that is near either the lunar morning or lunar sunset. And what you're looking at is a crater that's approximately 25 miles in diameter. And those are large cooling cracks in the bottom. This is probably of volcanic origin, and showing the detail along the crater rim and the small craters. Next slide. This is a shot to show you what the surface looks like at a different sun angle. We're getting up now at a reasonably high sun angle. The green in the other slide again is not natural. This is more what the surface actually looks like, a light brown, a light tan, depending on the sun angle. That's one characteristic of the lunar surface. Its appearance changes quite drastically with the sun angle that you're observing it. Okay, next slide. Just a final slide showing an area of interest to the geologist. You'll see that V, those are two large rills or depressions in the lunar surface. Apollo 12 seismograph picked up activity down in this area. I took this picture to compare with a shot taken from an unmanned lunar orbiter in 1965 to see if we could see the source of this activity. Also, now that 14 seismograph is operating on the lunar surface, we will be able to pin down the source of these so-called moonquakes. And that ends the slides. You can bring the lights up, and I'm not going to dwell any longer on my lunar on my activities in lunar orbit. I felt I made a sizable contribution to science as well, but we'll go into that another day. And I think at this time we'd like to field some questions and answers in the time remaining.
We have roving mics, and we'd like to start with the UCLA students first. If you'd raise your hand, we'll get a mic to you.
This is one right here we can repeat.
Let's start in the front. Rick, right here. Well, just speak. We'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
They were to Apollo 21 before, something like that. They're now down to 17. Now, have you gotten any kind of feedback of whether the geologists are very upset over this, or does it affect the amount of data that they can get from their flights?
Well, I'll start off. The way we generally answer questions is someone is bold enough to leap in, and then when he messes it up, one of the other two step in and they clarify the whole issue. Yes, I think the scientific community as a whole is upset about the cut in the number of missions to the moon. In fact, they submitted a paper on this subject from the scientific community as a group, saying they wish they had the data. What they're trying to do now is it's a matter of priorities and money. The missions were cut as the budget was reduced, and they're trying. Each mission gets bigger and better in the scientific return. They're going to try to do their best with those that are remaining. You are limited into what you can and cannot do on a mission just due to weight and size. Like I say, we start off with a research and development program, and each one gets better. 14 got more scientific return than its predecessors. 15 will beat us, certainly. But yes, there is a strong sentiment for the continued gathering of data to complete the overall picture of the moon and its processes and how they apply to the planet Earth.
Okay, could we have the next question, please? There's one over there.
I have heard that you did an ESP experiment while you were in outer space. I wondered how it turned out, and if you did any other kind of psychological experiments while you were out there.
I have not released that information to the press, and I do not have that information at this time, but I should have it before the summer's out, and I will publish it if there's anything worth publishing.
Could we have the next question, please? We have a question over there.
In view of the fact that the space program and the defense program is being slowed down somewhat into a more economic pace, I was wondering your gentlemen's opinions on why that the engineers who have worked in the space program seem to become real estate salesmen rather than producing the fallout that we were to expect from the space program.
Well, I think it's a good suggestion. The problem here is it's a good suggestion because you're talking about a national asset when you talk about trained people for a particular skill, and it certainly is a shame if a nation's interested in progress to waste this asset. Unfortunately, it's hard to do this with a rapid response. It's hard to shift people over to take care of these other problems without some kind of planning. Now, I think that a lot of these people that are now real estate salesmen will naturally be absorbed in programs of that type. But to create an immediate transfer from space-trained people into these other areas, it can't be done immediately. But I think it's a good idea. It should be certainly be looked at.
Yes, I was wondering, back here. I was wondering, you have a radio blackout when you go behind the moon in the Apollo program. And I was wondering why you don't orbit communication satellites in a synchronous orbit around the moon so you have constant radio communications with Earth.
It hasn't seemed to have been necessary at this point. If you really needed it, if it was a technical requirement, it could be done. But at this point in time, we haven't really needed that. We can do with that blackout.
Also, that has been studied, and certainly also a landing on what we refer to the backside, or the side that we do not see of the moon, has been studied. And if you did execute a landing here, you would put up a satellite, so you could have this type of communications with the limb, not only during the power descent and ascent, but also on the surface. And I'll just toss this out. Probably had we continued, you know, up through Apollo 20-some, we certainly would have seen a satellite such as this placed out, so we could have landed at places other than those on the front side.
Lieutenant Colonel Russo, this is to you. To quote you, you said people don't really give a hoot about the technology. They were just proud that Americans planted the flag on the moon. That was in regard to Apollo 11. Now, between Apollo 11 and your flight, the flag was planted on the moon one more time, so that was twice. Since this is a public program and people don't care about the technology, well, how do you justify your flight?
Let me see. I guess we need to start at least the first couple of sentences that again. Did I say that?
Yes, that was a quote from the New York Times.
What?
That was a quote from the New York Times.
Well, you know, whether or not it's printed in the New York Times is not relevant to whether I said it or not.
That was in regard.
I do not.
That'll sure as hell be printed in the New York Times.
But that was. I believe.
Yeah, maybe I'll be quoted correctly on that one. No, I guess I'd like to start off with. I'm sure that what I was talking about there was certain did not mean to come out that way. Now, I think the pride in planting the American flag on the lunar surface is one of the intangibles of the space program. I think it's a very important one. I don't think that that I said people did not care about. I think people are very interested in technology. I think they're very interested in the so-called spin-offs of the space program. But the point I would like to make is that every spin-off that you could list right now, you're shortchanging yourself. The biggest spin-off of the program is the one that you don't know about right now. That's true of any research and development program, and we've seen that down through the history of the country. I do think the pride in this country is a very important thing. I think it's pride in the country, pride in this school, pride in yourself that has made this country the world's greatest country that it is today. I think exploration has always been one of mankind's greatest adventure. If we did not have this, if we did not have this reach into the unknown, if we did not have this pride to take the United States into the unknown, we could just follow that right on back to where we're living in caves. Now, I don't care whether you like the word science and technology or not, but it's one of the things that has made this country great, just like pride in this country has what's made it great. And I do not mean that we care more for one than the other, and they go hand in hand. One is a very tangible benefit, one is an intangible benefit. And I think they're both personified in the space program and both very important.
Yeah. Isn't this on? Okay. I wanted to ask, I know some of the plans that are now holding for the manned orbiting laboratory, and that you had to cut down some of your advanced planning along with other things, with the cutbacks and money. But I was wondering if you had plans outstanding now as to a semi-permanent or a permanent moon base, or anything relating to that on the boards now.
Let me tell you that I try to think of a moon, of the moon, our moon, in terms of the South Pole. I think what we're doing now and what we will complete with Apollo 17 is to establish, first of all, what the moon is from a geological standpoint, what it can do for us from the scientific observation standpoint for the next 2 or 3 years with those devices we leave up there, how to go there if we need to. And the same sort of thing was done with the South Pole in past years. Up until now, there has really been no need for anybody to go to the South Pole except for scientific observation stations. And more recently, the Australians, discovering that their weather all came from the South Pole, have established a permanent meteorological station there. That's the kind of treatment I think we ought to give the moon. We find out how to live there if we need to live there. Now, maybe we won't go back again for another 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. But sooner or later, somebody will have, if only to maybe establish a colony. Perhaps it'll be that. Sooner or later, we'll have to use that technical knowledge to get back there. That's the kind of analogy I'd like to have you consider, that really the moon program is to find out how to live there, and if we want to use it later on, we can. Now, as far as the Earth orbital program is concerned, I think we'd like to have a little more money in that area, because this is the area where we're talking about using infrared sensors, photographic surveys to talk about damaged crops, damage to forest areas. We're talking about looking at estuaries, pollution in the streams, fish movements, all these kind of things, the real payoff of looking back toward the Earth. But I think perhaps we'd like to see more money spent in the shuttle program, which is beyond that, where we'll have reusable vehicles where they'll take off and land like regular airplanes, take off vertically and land like regular airplanes, go up and revisit satellites, repair satellites, replenish orbital stations. I think this is the area where we feel we'd like to see more money being spent.
We have time for one more question.
What is your opinion of astronauts who lend their names to false advertising like the F-310 commercials? Do you feel
I had trouble hearing that. Could you repeat that, please?
What is your opinion of astronauts who lend their names to false advertising and advertisements like F-310? Do you think they are being used by the public, by advertising agents for their great cause?
Well, first of all, I think you have to look at each individual case, and you have to recognize these people are no longer astronauts that when they go out into the commercial field. They are ex-astronauts, and their life to live is theirs to live as they would like to do so. And whether we agree or disagree really has no bearing on the question whatsoever.
I just have a final announcement to make that was handed to me. Those students who came in buses but are leaving by cars should go down to Jan's steps between the men's and women's gym. Well, thank you all very much for coming, and I'd like to thank the Apollo 14 astronauts for being with us.